Okay, Hari Om. So this is session number 10, chapter number 9, which is called Rajvidya, Rajguhya Yoga, the yoga of royal knowledge and royal secret. And in other words, faith, devotion, and the attainment of the supreme goal through knowledge. So here, the question then is, what is this royal knowledge? Is there something different about it? What's the royal secret? Why do we call it the secret? And how does it then relate to what we were looking at in the last chapter and the last chapter, which is chapter number 7? So we have seen that chapter number 8 was a kind of bit of a diversion because Arjuna had asked the question about the um, various different technical terms which Bhagwan used at the end of chapter number 7. And it took him through another route of kind of seeing how one can proceed from looking at the manifestation of Brahman in the created world and how that can lead us to doing our practices or sadhana in such a way that even at the moment of death, if we are able to recollect this knowledge, then we can have this, what is known as Krama Mukti. Not Jivan Mukti, but Krama Mukti in the sense that at the point of death, although you have done all the things which which was prescribed, it is as if at that moment, last moment, you are able to attain liberation through this gradual process of coming to that point of entry. And here then Bhagwan is taking us in a slightly kind of different way of looking at this whole idea of the sadhak and the sadhana. So first of all, in this chapter, introduction to the royal knowledge and the royal secret, which is verses number 1 to 3, and then the revelation of the absolute truth, which is 4 and 5, a brief introduction as to what we are going to be talking about. And then in relationship to the beings, in other words, the creation and the creatures, immediately follows this revelation about the truth. And the nature of Ishvara. So here we got everything into these three themes. We are looking at the absolute truth, then we are looking at the creation, and then we are also looking at Ishvara. So you remember this trinity of Jiva, Jagat, and Jagdishvara. We have to kind of understand that in its proper relationship with each other, so that we can then follow what is the pathway for us to then reach the absolute truth. And from the Advaita Vedanta point of view, of course, it is about the name and the form of Ishvara, first of all, through creation, and then the absolute truth, Brahman. So all three are being mentioned here. And Bhagwan then goes on to talk about the three types of people and their relationship with God. He goes on to then talk about how to know Bhagwan, how do we know Bhagwan through Jnana and Vijnana. So these two words he uses even in the first verse. And that gives us a kind of clue as to where Bhagwan is taking his pathway from chapter number 7 to then reflecting some of those themes which we looked at in chapter number 7 being reflected here in chapter number 9. So some of these things are really, one can see, directly connected to what he was talking in chapter number 7, including the manifestation of the divine in the creation. So Bhagwan then talks about the path of karma, and then he talks about the path of devotion, which is the final section. Now you'll see that, he's talking about the Jiva, Jagat, and Ishvara on the one hand, the three types of people and how they relate to God. And finally, he's talking about the three pathways. So in a sense, the secret is this, that we can combine all these pathways in relationship to this Jiva, Jagat, and Ishvara in such a way that we can get instant realization. Now, how that is going to work is what we are going to be looking at. So let's look at the logic and flow of thought so far. I mean, just an overview of what we have talked about so that we can put it in the context of the kind of ideas which we have spoken about so far. So, first of all, we kind of look at the whole Bhagavad Gita, an overview, the setting and the teaching, and the main themes which run through the Bhagavad Gita. As we know, it's really about dharma and moksha. And these two things are really the underlying kind of themes which then are expressed in different ways in relation to the different things and the sadhanas, the practices, as well as the seekers, as well as the ultimate reality as it is described. And then chapter number 1, of course, takes us into looking at Arjuna's condition as in the middle of the battlefield, how he is distressed condition, and how Bhagwan responds to this kind of condition in which Arjuna is, and gives him an overview of the guidance in chapter number 2, as we saw in this session. Then chapter number 2 is Bhagwan's full response and the overall teaching, which really is talking about Sankhya Yoga, Karma Yoga, and the person of perfection who is established in the knowledge. So these are the three main things he kind of talks about again a kind of overview, which then he takes various elements of this particular uh, overview and takes us through understanding each and every aspect of Sankhya Yoga, Karma Yoga, and the person of established knowledge. And then Karma Yoga is talked about in detail in the nature of action, the sacrifice, and the means of purification, which comes through Karma Yoga. Renunciation of action in knowledge is the next chapter. And here Bhagwan reveals his divine nature and his purpose, his incarnation, why he is amongst humanity, what is his purpose, is to redress the balance, which has gone out of balance. In other words, dharma and adharma. Where adharma is rising, he is now come to make sure that dharma starts rising again. And this is his purpose. And this is what he kind of talks about right at the beginning of this chapter, and then talks about renunciation of action in knowledge. So this is about how we can think about action in relationship to our spiritual journey, and how, in a sense, that if we are identifying ourselves as the doer of various different things, how can we get away from this sense of doership? And this is through renunciation of action in the knowledge. And the knowledge is that I am not the doer and I'm not the enjoyer. So it gives us the basis on which that can be done. Karma Yoga, Bhakti Yoga, which is Saguna Upasana on the one hand, and Jnana Yoga, Nirguna Dhyanam on the other hand. So again, a specification of really what he was talking about in chapter number 2. Then true renunciation, Brahmanishta, the nature of Jnana-nishtha, the Jnani, and the Atmavid. Now, this is again a kind of fast route, as it were, because if anybody who has come to that point of, renouncing in this kind of way, then it shows that there is a way in which, this kind of journey through Jnana Nishtha can take place. And we'll talk about that a bit more later on. Yoga of meditation, Karma Yogi, Sannyasi, Tajnani, and the technique of meditation, and how these are all related together as various stages of our spiritual journey. And the technique of meditation is about a deep state of absorption in this highest knowledge. And it gives us step-by-step detail as to how we can go about reaching those high states of meditation. And in fact, as we know that there is a kind of resonance between chapter number 6 and what it talks about in the Yoga Sutra as the states of dharana, dhyan, and samadhi. And these are taken up in detail in this chapter as well. So these first 6 chapters are about the individual and the state and the human condition and what he needs to start doing in order to reach the highest good. And the second set of 6 chapters, which starts with chapter number 7, is about the divine. And Bhagwan starts talking about the knowledge and the wisdom in this chapter, and he switches the channel to that, or the divine, from the individual, which is the person, which includes you and me, and whatever condition is, why is it that we are suffering? Why is it that we experience Shoka Moha Bhaya? And this is what Arjuna was actually experiencing, and how that can be overcome once and for all. So Bhagwan is actually giving us the ultimate solution to suffering, because suffering is part and parcel of our human condition, whether you call it grief, Shoka, whether you call it delusion, or the sense of unreality about various different things and facts of life, or whether we call it bhaya. And this anxiety and depression is something which we see so much now. And delusion, of course, is not facing up to the facts. One can say that is delusion. So, how then we can get away from that to a situation whereby we become totally immersed in this divine knowledge, so that we can get away from the daily anxieties and depressions which we go through. And sometimes that happens in a intense way, just like we are experiencing in this lockdown. Many people have got mental health issues. So, chapter number 8, the Yoga of Imperishable Brahman. This is answering Arjuna's questions about what he talked about, and showing a path to Brahman by remembering the imperishable at the time of death. So, just like I was saying, that Arjun's question are related to what Bhagwan spoke about at the end of chapter number 7, various different technical items like Adhiyagna, Adhibhuta, etc. And this then Bhagwan answers in full, at the same time taking him along the pathway of understanding, really, how to reach this imperishable Brahman by this gradual method of liberation. So here, let's just remind ourselves that really what the first 6 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita are. Here's the problem: Jiva Vishada, and the suffering of the individual jiva, Shoka Moha Bhaya, which I mentioned just now. And this is due to this identification with the body, mind, intellect, with this individuality, and thinking that I am this individual existing in this world of names and forms and other creatures and other beings. And my relationship to the world is then experienced as grief, as delusion, and as anxiety or fear. In order then to kind of get away from this constant experience which I have in this state of jivahood, what do I have to do? So Bhagwan gives us the ultimate solution, as it were, of how to then think about what is it, what is the method, what is the understanding, what is the philosophy, and the solution is jiva sadhana. Sadhana means practice, and it leads to liberation from this identification with the body, mind, intellect. So here's the kind of journey which is described by Bhagwan in a kind of overview way, which is that we start with Karma Yoga and Karma Sannyas, which means a steady kind of gradual moving away from the sense of doership, establishing ourselves in our true identity through Jnana Yoga, and then through the practice of dhyana, meditation, we become fully absorbed in that knowledge. So this is kind of a way in which we can look at the journey of purification and then absorption. These are really can be seen as 2 stages of our spiritual journey. First part is purification, which is about slowly and gradually getting away from the sense of doership and enjoyership, this identification with the body, mind, intellect, detachment from the things which we have got totally attached to. And this purification process is required for us in order to go to the next stage, which is about absorption. Now, that absorption is dhyana, and that cannot happen unless we have got a certain kind of purity in the mind. Purity in the mind allows us to have three things, basically. Three things are that it allows me to have a single pointedness of mind. It also allows me to have stillness of the mind and also subtleness of the mind. With this purification comes the ability and the capacity to engage in dhyana, to get into deep states of absorption, and therefore it leads me to the final realization and therefore liberation. So there's a connection, of course, as we have seen, between liberation and realization. As soon as we realize our true nature, we get liberated from this cycle of birth and death. So basically, one can see that this is really what Bhagavad Gita is talking about, and the first 6 chapters focus on these ideas. So again, to remind ourselves, it's about knowledge and the practice, and the two are required for transformation. In terms of the Bhagavad Gita, selfless action, knowledge of the self leads to self-realization, and Karma Yoga, Jnana Yoga leads to Jnana Nishtha. So if we keep this overall picture in mind, then, if we read each and every individual verse of the Bhagavad Gita, we can put it in the context of this framework within which we have been thinking about. And it makes it easier for us to then understand. So here, looking at chapter number 2, again, to remind ourselves, Sankhya Yoga, knowledge of the self, Karma Yoga, yoga of action, and then finally the outcome of this knowledge and the practice, which is the person of perfection, which Bhagwan Krishna gives us the characteristics of the one who is established in the knowledge. So we got an idea about the pathway which we're going to take. Knowledge is required, practice is required, and then he gives us the idea as to what's going to be the effect of that, what is going to be the outcome when we actually do that, and it is about becoming the person of perfection. So another way of looking at is this, is that Sankhya and Yoga, Arjuna's distress condition, uh, complete renunciation leads to Jnana Nishtha, who is the Jnani. And here, Jnana Nishtha can be arrived at through purification, renunciation in action, of action in knowledge, and then finally Jnana Yoga, which then leads to Jnana Nishtha. And then through renunciation, which comes through this gradual process of engaging ourselves in selfless action and renunciation, that true renunciation then takes us to a place where we can practice Jnana Yoga. And with that then comes the Jnana Nishtha. So there is a kind of gradual pathway through Karma Yoga, renunciation of action and knowledge, and then Jnana Yoga, and then Jnana Nishtha. Or if there is already true renunciation, which means the kind of purity which was required is already there. And we can see that there are some young people who already have that kind of purity, and they go straight into Jnana Yoga. They don't have much to do with the world or things of the world, and they go straight into sannyas. They take up a state of sannyashood, and they go straight into the Jnana Yoga and Jnana Nishtha. So here's the way in which we can look at the journey as it unfolds for us in the Bhagavad Gita. And another way of looking at it, as we have seen before, is we start with a person who is totally identified himself or herself as the karta and the bhokta, and karma yogi, who then begins to get away from the fruits of the action. He becomes a bhokta. Still, there is a bit of identification. He's still a karta, and slowly, as he begins to get away from this identification as the enjoyer, he becomes a karta, a bhokta to a certain extent. And with the jnana, then comes the renunciation of both these things of doership and enjoyership, and he becomes totally established in this akarta abhokta bhava, and he becomes atmavit, which means that he becomes the knower of the truth. So here is what we can see. This is the journey, steady renunciation of the fruit of the action and action itself. This identification from the enjoyership and the doership leads us from where we probably would have been as karmis, totally identified, to one who is totally established in the true knowledge, Atmavit, who has become completely disidentified from any kind of enjoyership and doership. And that is, of course, through meditation. So here, remember that Bhagwan talked in chapter number 7, which is going to be another kind of connection between that chapter and chapter number 9. He says, I shall declare to you the full knowledge combined with realization, jnana and vijnana, which is same, he uses the same words in verse number 1 of chapter number 9 as well, which, uh, which being known, nothing remains to be known. So jnanam, saguna, bhakti, paroksha jnanam, knowledge, which is mediate, intellectual, and this is a kind of intellectual process, which we can say is jnanam, whereas vijnanam is nirguna jnanam, which is aparoksha jnanam, realization, which is immediate, experiential, without any kind of mediation of any of the instruments of the body, mind, intellect. And this is about knowing Brahman is becoming Brahman. It's not about knowing through the mind or the intellect, but that knowing becomes a direct experience of Brahmanhood. And the goal, and this is one way in which we can think about Vijnanam as Nirgunam, and also in a sense of practice. So the Jnanam and the Vijnanam, knowledge and realization, are put together in this kind of way so that we know that there is a part which is related to the attainment of knowledge, and there's a part which is attainment of the realization itself. And we should be aware of these two processes which are taking place. And again, looking at it from another point of view, apara prakriti and para prakriti, which he talked about in chapter number 7 as well. This is the Ishvara Swarupam, which he talks about. This is my lower nature, this is my higher nature. But both of them are my nature. Now, how are we to understand that? Are we to understand it as cause and effect, or are we to understand it in a different way? And this again comes up in chapter number 9. So again, I like making this diagrams because it shows that really, we need to understand the pathways, because then we know where we are, what is the journey, what is required, how are we going to go about doing this. So in chapter number 8, this is the method of gradual liberation. Okay? And here what happens is that the unmanifest Brahman leads to direct liberation, whereas the Saguna Bhakti manifest Brahman, when we do the upasana, which we have done throughout our life, but have not yet reached the state of liberation, then even in the final moment, the idea is that even in the final moment, if I have full absorption in Om at the point of death, it leads me to a state of liberation, which is called Kamamukti. And this upasana, if it's done in that kind of way, but we are not able to still have this Om in mind at the time of absorption, then it leads to elevated births. In other words, that we kind of go up the spiral of more and more kind of knowledge and experience in our future births. So this really is the way in which he described the route to liberation in chapter number 8, gradual liberation. Okay, so again, looking at what Arjuna asked in the previous chapter, chapter number 7, which was then explained in chapter number 8. Now, I'm showing you this because this has got relevance to what we are going to talk about today. And in order to understand what Bhagwan is talking about, the royal knowledge and the royal secret, then what is it that he's talking about? Because then if we are to have this absolute reality as our goal, then how are we to reach that when we are completely in the darkness about what that really is? Because we have no experience of that. So how are we going to connect ourselves to that imperishable nirguna, absolute truth, to the saguna, perishable truth which we can experience here and now, and what are the connections between the two, and how are they related to what's happening at the macrocosmic level, and what is happening in you and me in terms of this expression of Brahman through the body, mind, intellect. all these are important to remember, these principles, because it's not that Brahman is somewhere very far away where I can't reach it. Bhagwan always is insisting to us that this is here and now. Brahman is here and now. We have to learn how to recognize that divinity in moment to moment of our experience in this transactional reality, so that we can gradually begin to move to the absolute reality. And that principle we have to kind of make sure that we understand it in the way in which Bhagwan is very clearly telling us that when you look at sentiency, for example, when you look at that you are able to control, that I'm able to control what I'm speaking, this is because the deva of my speech is active at this moment, functioning and making me to be able to control my speech. But that deva who is controlling my speech is nothing but an expression of that ultimate reality called Brahman. So these connections are important for us to keep in mind while we are seeking the ultimate truth. So let's now go to chapter number 9. And here Bhagwan is introducing us to the royal knowledge and the royal secret. So the Blessed Lord said that you, Arjuna, who do not cavil. Now, this is important again to think about why he is telling Arjuna this knowledge, giving him the secret. I shall now declare this greatest secret, the most profound knowledge, jnana, combined with experience, vijnana, or realization, which having known, you shall be free from sorrows of life. So, what are the three things here he's talking about? Number one, Arjuna as the receptor of this profound knowledge combined with experience. Why is it that Bhagwan is giving him this knowledge? Is because he is not a fault finder. Cavilling means finding faults. Now, what has that got to do with getting this secret? You may wonder. Okay. So fault finding comes from where? Fault finding comes from what Bhagwan talks about just now in this third verse. It comes because there is no faith. Faith is the basis of understanding and having this profound knowledge, jnana. And faith is required absolutely for the experience. And the third thing which is talking about here. So number one, why is Arjuna an adhikari? Why is it that he is able to? Bhagwan is saying, yes, because you do not cavil, I shall declare this greatest secret to you. Why is it that he is telling him this? Is because he is an adhikari. Secondly, he's telling him that I'm going to give you this profound knowledge, jnana and vijnana, and which having known, the third thing is you'll become free from all sorrows of life. Remember, that was the original proposition, is that jiva vishada is what we want to get away from. And therefore, this is how it is going to be done, by having this profound knowledge and this vijnana or experience. And what we need for that is, of course, faith. So the royal science, royal secret, the supreme purifier, is this realizable by direct intuitive knowledge according to the Dharma, very easy to perform, imperishable. So when Bhagwan says very easy to perform, we may think, oh, Bhagwan is saying it's very easy to perform, but he's actually talking within the context of this chapter. Now, this is the royal secret. If you know the royal knowledge and you know the royal secret, it is very easy to perform. And this royal science, why does he call it the royal science? This royal knowledge, this royal science, is because it is profound knowledge. It is the knowledge of all knowledge. In other words, that there is, we can think of knowledge as of all different kinds of knowledge. So I have a knowledge of my laptop, for example. I have knowledge of this, that, and the other, like economy, politics, etc., etc. And all this kind of knowledge is our secular knowledge. What we can say is secular knowledge. We can think of spiritual knowledge. And out of that spiritual knowledge, this knowledge which Bhagwan is talking about is the king of all knowledge. In other words, it's the highest knowledge which one can get. In other words, the supreme knowledge. And what is that supreme knowledge? He has already told us, jnana and vijnana. And as we understand it through the chapter, we'll see what he refers to in terms of this particular knowledge. Now, why a secret? Um, so one can say that this secret is only a secret if we don't understand it. So he is talking about this secretiveness or secret in the context of actually, if you talk to me in a certain language or you talk about quantum physics, it's like it's like secret. It's beyond me. I can't understand it. It goes over my head. Okay. In a sense, it remains secret. Even if it is heard, it remains a secret because I am not able to understand it. And I don't understand it because I have no kind of no knowledge of it, and nobody has explained it to me, and I have not made the effort to explain or to understand it in the way it is being explained, and therefore it remains a secret. Okay, it remains a mystery. So it is a mystery, and mystery in this case is like having a secret. So it is royal knowledge, royal secret, and he says it's a supreme purifier. Why should he say this is a supreme purifier? Is because this is the if we have this knowledge, remember purification in the Bhagavad Gita is related to what? It is related to um, getting rid of this idea that I am the enjoyer and I am the doer. And as much as we kind of get into this royal knowledge, then it becomes a way of purifying ourselves in a very intense way. So the mananam and the nitidhyasanam, or the mananam reflection and the practice which is done of this knowledge becomes an extremely intense purifier of our me and mind. And when that is the case, there is a kind of intuitive sense of this knowledge which begins to develop, and I get it immediately like this, according to the Dharma. Now, in this case, Dharma is talking about is the Atma. Okay. So this Dharmyam is talking about is, in a broad sense, we can say Dharma is that which supports. In the case of a human being, what is supporting us in this kind of sentient, vital way is the Atman. Atman, without that, of course, the inert body becomes inert. It is not able to function. So this is Dharmyam. This is the Atma. And he says that this is the one which is imperishable. So this is now what Bhagwan is talking about in the context of the royal secret and the royal knowledge, and it becomes completely a purifier to get us quickly into uh, that state of the purity of the mind, whereby directly we can see it, grasp the truth. On the other hand, persons without faith in this dharma, the divine self, or Parantapa, without attaining me, return to the path of rebirth fraught with death. So you can see that, he's talking about faith in this context of getting this knowledge, purifying intuitive knowledge that will not be available unless there is faith in the self. So what does it mean, faith in the self? It means that I take it as a given truth that there is a divine self, and therefore I have got nothing to find fault with this knowledge. That's why Arjuna becomes an adhikari. Why? Because he has got this supreme faith. And because he has this faith, he's not complaining about it. He is not confused. He is not having any kind of doubt about this. And he's saying, since you are not cavilling, then here is what I'm going to reveal to you, this greatest secret. If, on the other hand, there is no faith, then what happens is that the path of birth and death continues, the samsara continues. We are not able to liberate ourselves from this cycle of birth and death. And then again and again, we get into this states of suffering, which is really what we started off by saying, that we want to escape from this suffering Shoka Moha Bhaya. And the ultimate solution to that is to have this supreme knowledge. So then Bhagwan goes on to talk about the revelation of the absolute truth. So what is this absolute truth? He says, all this world is pervaded by me in my unmanifest form. So Bhagwan is here and now. Bhagwan as not Krishna as this name and form, but Bhagwan as the ultimate reality, as Brahman. He is here and now because he says, all this world is pervaded by me in my unmanifest form. Unmanifest form means that it is not realizable by us through our sense perception, through the mind, or through the intellect. And in this respect, he says, all beings exist in me, but I do not dwell in them. So now I'll explain this a bit later on. But just to remember that this whole world is pervaded by the unmanifest. All beings like you and me, everything is existing in that reality, which is unmanifest. But he says, I do not dwell in them. Now, we may try to think about why he's saying that. Um, and we'll see how he kind of again talks from two different points of view. Then he says, nor do beings exist in me in reality. Behold my divine yoga supporting all beings, but not dwelling in them. I myself the efficient cause of all beings. In other words, that I am, in a sense, the cause of all these beings. They exist in me, but I do not dwell in them. And this is my divine yoga. This is my supreme yoga, which is supporting everything, this totality of creation. I pervade this creation. And he says, these beings actually don't exist in me. Okay. And he says that I'm not dwelling in them. They are not existing in me. And I am still the efficient cause of all beings. So this we have to take a bit of time to understand, this kind of apparent contradictions which are going on in them. So in 9.4, Bhagwan is saying, I am not in them. Then he is saying, they are not in me. It's 9.4 and 9.5. Then he is saying later on in the chapter, I am in them, 929, and they are in me. Again, kind of resonating with what is said in chapter number 7:12 and 929 as well. So it looks as if, it's a kind of direct contradiction of what he's talking about in the first two lines, and then the second two lines appear to be a complete contradiction of these two statements. Now, we know that Bhagwan cannot be contradicting himself in that way, and therefore we got to try and understand what he's talking about. So here's one way in which we can think about it. So snake and rope, okay? This is the example which we talk about in Advaita Vedanta, is that is this a rope or is it a snake? It looks like a rope, but it is a snake. Is it a rope? Is it a snake? Okay. So the snake is appearing in the rope. Now, how to understand this particular idea is that there is this concept that in Advaita Vedanta that there is only one reality, but what we are experiencing is not one reality. It seems to be fragmented. It is consisting of so many parts. It's not one reality. If you tell me that all this thing is one thing, I begin to have a bit of doubt that the cup in front of me, the laptop in front of me, and this, what I'm seeing as the picture of Patanjali, which is right there in front of me, these are all separate concrete objects which I see in front of me. They are not one thing. So if you are to understand what Bhagwan was talking about as this kind of two contradictory, apparently statements, then we can think of it in this way. Reference point number one. From the absolute point of view, nothing is in me. Snake is not in the rope. And from that point of view also, that I'm not in them. The rope is not in the snake. And why is that? Is because The snake is an illusion. The reality is the rope. The snake is an illusion which is created by my own ignorance. So if I look at it from the absolute point of view, snake does not exist and snake is not in the rope. And similarly, if I look at it from that absolute point of view of the rope, which is the reality, then the rope is not in the snake. Either way, that is the truth. But on the other hand, if I take the reference point of the transactional reality, then of course, in my ignorance, I can say, yes, snake is in the rope and the rope is in the snake. And also Bhagwan can claim the same thing. They are in me and I am in them. Because from the transactional point of view, the reality becomes different. From the absolute point of view, the reality is different. And the whole point is that there is a superimposition of the snake on the rope. And that is the delusion which is created because out of our ignorance, this illusion that there is a snake comes about. And from that point of view, we can say, yeah, snake is in the rope and the rope is in the snake. Okay? So this is how we can look at this two kind of apparently contradictory states. One is from the absolute point of view, one is from the relative point of view. And we have seen this in the earlier chapters as well, whereby, this sense of um, what we call, whereby we are looking at the enjoyership and the doership, and we talked about the actionlessness. How can one be operating in this world and be in a state of actionlessness? Once you have reached that state of realization, you are not taking any action because Brahman does not act. From that point of view, actionlessness is there. From the transactional point of view, action is going on. Okay, breathing is going on, talking is going on, walking is going on. I do nothing. I do nothing is who, not this ego individuality, but my true identity as Brahman. Brahman is not doing anything. So these 2 points of view, especially from the Advaita Vedanta point of view, we can think of it in this manner. So beings, creatures and creation. So from the transactional point of view, Bhagwan is talking about it now, explaining a bit more, saying, as the mighty wind moving everywhere rests always in space, the Akasha, even so know you all beings rest in me. So again, this relationship between the transactional and the eternal. And we can think of this space as the reality, and that all the things which are existing in this space. So the mighty wind, the air is in the space, and the air is cannot exist without the space, but the space can exist without the air. Similarly, think about how you can think of this particular example and what we talked about just now. And it says, all beings of Kunteya, son of Kunti, go into my Prakriti at the end of a kalpa. And you remember kalpa is a very long time. Um, and this is kalpa is, one can say, is the day and night of Brahma. And he says, I send them forth at the beginning of the next kalpa. So relationship again between the absolute and the transactional is that prakriti is created, it exists for a certain amount of time, then it goes back into the eternal, as it were, and then comes up back again. And we can compare that to our going to sleep at night, that we disappear, the world disappears, but as soon as we wake up and open our eyes, the world appears to us as something which is in front of us. But when we go back again to sleep in the next kalpa or the next night, then everything disappears again. So we are sent back and forth again and again. And Bhagavan says, animating my Prakriti, I again and again send forth all this helpless multitude of beings by the force of nature, Prakriti. So there is this creation which is taking place with this helplessness, because it's Bhagavan who is creating, who is sustaining, and who is then dissolving this whole creation in these kalpas, which are going on and on and on. And what the point here is that this kind of helplessness whereby we are put into creation and then remain there and come out. What we want to do is to escape all these things which are going on, whether at the individual level of samsara or at the cosmic level, whereby things are coming into creation and sustaining there and disappearing. So then Bhagwan goes on to tell us about the nature of creation. So, first of all, he was talking about the revelation of the absolute truth, and then he talked about the creation and how this creation is under his control, as it were. And he brings forth this whole creation, including all the beings which exist in him, like he's saying, just like the air exists in the space, and then they go out and come back and go forth, back and forth. And now he's going to talk about the nature of Ishvara. So, relationship between the divine self and Prakriti. What is that relationship? He says that sitting like one indifferent, unattached to these acts, Dhananjaya, these acts do not bind me. So, although all these things are going on, even at the cosmic level, creation is taking place. It is remaining, it is going out into dissolution. Bhagwan says that completely indifferent, unattached to these actions which are taking place. He says, they do not mind me. Now, remember in chapter number 4, Bhagwan was talking about if you understand my divine nature in the right way, you can get realized, you can get liberated. Now, think about how Bhagwan is talking about the creation and activities which are going on in creation, and what is his relationship to that creation and the activity which is going on. So think of Brahman as our underlying substratum reality, which is animating me. Remember that diagram I showed you about Brahman and Adidevata, Adiyagna, Adhyatma, how Brahman is expressing through all these things as sentiency in myself. Whereas Brahman is not kind of involved in any of these activities which are going on, it remains indifferent, unattached. So, what is going on at the cosmic level is also what is going on at my individual level. And if I understand this relationship, then I'm having this secret revealed to me. This royal knowledge is becoming available to me. By understanding Bhagwan himself, I can understand myself because, in essence, my um, Atman is nothing different from Brahman. And if you understand it in that way, then it makes it easier. And Bhagwan is directly stating here that he is indifferent, unattached to these things which are going on in creation. And he says, under me as her supervisor, Prakriti produces the moving and the unmoving. Because of this, the world revolves. So again, Prakriti is under the supervision of Bhagwan. And he says this produces the moving and the unmoving. And therefore, the whole kind of creation revolves, the world revolves, the planets revolve, the solar system is there, the galaxies, etc., etc. Right down to me as this individual. I'm also revolving in a sense because things are happening. There are cycles within my own body, breathing in, breathing out. All this is going on. And there are things in front of me which are unmoving, inert, insentient objects. All this is going on, and Bhagwan is the supervisor. So then Bhagwan goes on to talk about the three types of people and God. Actually, it's two people if you kind of combine the two things together. So we can think of two extremes of people and God. So one extreme is this: the fools. Bhagwan calls them the mudas, the fools, rakshasas, and the asuras. What are the characteristics of these people? He says, they disregard me when I dwell in human form. In other words, they cannot even recognize Bhagwan in the world, even in any other creature, in Bhagwan himself as in this human form. They disregard me. And he says they do not know my higher being as the great Lord of all beings. So nor do they know the lower nature in terms of the human form, nor do they know the higher nature, which is the substratum of all existence. In other words, they are in a state of complete ignorance. And he says, of vain hopes, vain actions, and vain knowledge. All these things are related to what? They are related to the ego identity, which is living in complete ignorance of anything else. And therefore, they have hope that they're going to get something or the other, which is going to make them happy. That prompts them into action. And this action is based on vain knowledge. It's knowledge about the world and about themselves as doers and enjoyers. And therefore, they keep on going round and round. Neither do they know anything about the divine, nor they have any idea about, what they are doing and why they are doing it. And all this is vain hopes and vain actions and vain knowledge. And he says it is senseless in nature. It doesn't seem to have any kind of ultimate purpose, and they are possessed of a delusive nature. So all this is what we can say is a state of complete avidya, ignorance. And in that ignorance, neither is the divine acknowledged, nor is the sense of ego identity given up. And this, what Bhagwan says, are the fools. Why is somebody foolish? Is because they do not understand the means and the ends. They do not realize that there is a true meaning and there is a true purpose to life. And because of that ignorance, they behave foolishly in their lives. On the other hand of the other end of the spectrum are the Mahatmas, the great souls. They are partaking of my divine nature. In other words, they fully realize that there is a divine nature. They know about it. They worship this divine divinity with a single mind, with a mind devoted to nothing else. Ananya. Remember, Bhagwan uses this word called ananya. No other. No other means only one. And it also means that there is a single pointed and a single mind about what one is doing. So worship me with a single mind, which means that there is nothing else in their mind. They're not worshiping anything else. They're not saying, okay, I'm going to worship my business and I'm going to worship the Lord as well. That is not there for these Mahatmas. They are only having thoughts of God, feelings for God, and actions dedicated to God, knowing me as the imperishable source of all being. So, in other words, they not only know the substratum, but they also kind of know how this is being expressed in themselves and how they continuously turn towards the divine, knowing that whatever exists in the creation is nothing but divine. So these are the two extremes. Now, why is Bhagwan telling us this? He is saying that this royal knowledge and this royal secret actually is not going to be available to these fools because they will not even know what I'm talking about. They will just kind of walk out of the house because they have no idea what you're talking about. Whereas the Mahatmas, deep into this knowledge, deep into this experience, knowing me as the imperishable source of all beings and worshipping me with this single mind. So these are the Mahatmas who have the jnana and they have the vijnana, and therefore they know about the royal knowledge and they have the royal secret with them. Okay, so then giving us an idea about these Mahatmas, then what Bhagwan is saying, these Mahatmas, then how do they actually function? They are always glorifying me, Kirtanam. Now, Kirtanam in this kind of way is not specifically related to singing of the Kirtanam. What it kind of means in a very general sense, in a bigger picture, is that they are looking at everything within this creation which is perceptible to them through the senses and the mind and the intellect, and they kind of keep on continuously singing the glories of this creation and the divinity in this creation. This is really the bigger kind of kirtanam which is going on in the minds of these Mahatmas. In other words, that they are always looking at, I'm seeing this, but I'm not seeing this world of names and forms, but I'm seeing an expression of divinity. This is glorification of the divine through this kind of kirtana. They're always striving and firm in vows that this determination is there. This striving is this. There's a lot of effort which is being made, always striving towards divinity and very firm in their resolve that I want nothing else. Remember, Ananya, I want nothing else except the divine. So they're firm in their vows, prostrating before me. In other words, humility, giving up this sense of I am this, even the seeker, or I am a devotee. And this prostration is about humility. It's about giving up this sense of me and mine. It is a way of extinguishing the sense of ego and always steadfast, not going here and there and coming back again, always steadily going on with this particular way of functioning in the world. And they worship me with devotion. So this is the way in which the Mahatmas actually function in their lives. And Bhagavan says that also others who offer the wisdom sacrifice worship me, regarding me as one. Regarding me as one is the Advaita way of looking at things as distinct, Vishishta Advaita, that I am distinct, but I'm also part of the whole. And then the third one, which is as manifold, that there are many faces everywhere. There is the divine spark in each one of these forms and faces everywhere. And this is the Dvaita way of thinking. This is one interpretation of this particular verse, is that it describes the three major pathways of Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, Vishishta Advaita Vedanta, and Dvaita Vedanta. And these are, of course, Shankaracharya ji and Ramanujacharya ji and Madhvacharya ji. So it means that, there are various different ways of relating to the divine. And these are the ways in which Bhagwan is describing to us. And one way of describing the Mahatmas, and another way of describing how some people will take a slightly different route. Okay, so in these verses from 8 to 12, Bhagwan is giving us the ways of recognizing him in the created objective world. Vijnanam is vibhuti, and we look at the world through new knowledge. The world is the cosmic divine manifestation, as is told us in chapter number 7. And all these are ways in which we can begin to kind of associate with divinity. And as much as we kind of look at something, or taste something, or hear something, or feel something, and touch something, each and every thing is associated with a sense, and that sense object becomes the divine object, and therefore there is a continuous kind of connection with divinity through all these senses which I am perceiving at any moment of time. Okay? And life in all beings, strength in the strong, etc. He is giving us all this in chapter number 7. Similarly, what he's saying in chapter number 9, I am the Kratu sacrificer, offering to the ancestors medicinal herb and all the plants, the mantra, the clarified butter, the fire, and the oblation. Remember that the Brahmarpanam Brahmahavi, this is the kind of yajna sacrifice which is being talked about here. And Bhagwan is saying everything which is going on in terms of this sacrifice, this yajna, each and every element of that is me. In other words, you may see various different objects and you can divide them in processes and objects, but really speaking, it's one thing. I'm the father of this world, the mothers, the supporter, the grandsire, to be known, the purifier, etc. And again, saying that this is how I am to be recognized in the creation. Recognition has to be there, and then association, and this is called conscious superimposition, and then taking away the superimposition to reveal the secret which is behind the superimposition, which is a substratum of all existence. So again, chapter number 7, relationship with chapter number 9 is clear here. And then Bhagwan goes on to talk about the path of karma. So here Bhagwan says these are the Vedic ritualists. Now, in this sense, we are specifically talking about the people who perform these rituals. He says these are the knowers of the three Vedas, the drinkers of Soma, purified from sin, worshipping me by sacrifices, pray for the way to heaven. They reach the holy world of the Lord of the gods and enjoy in heaven the divine pleasures of the gods. So what Bhagwan is saying, yes, there are people who will be this kind of ritualistic people. And, it doesn't necessarily have to be this kind of ritual which we normally associate with this yajna, homa, havan, etc. But it can be seen in a more symbolic way as well. But what really it means is that, the knowers of the Veda, they perform these rituals and perform the rituals, offering sacrifices, worshipping the Lord, but what they are actually looking for is not liberation. They are looking for divine pleasures. In other words, the human pleasures are not enough for them and they want divine pleasure. So here they are saying, okay, I'm going to worship you, I'm going to make this sacrifice, and I'm going to do all these kind of things. And what I'm going to look for is the divine pleasure. In other words, really speaking, that purification is not to the extent where they have seen through these pleasures as temporary, transient things which come and go. But really speaking, what he's saying that they also get elevated to the higher planes of existence. And once they have enjoyed this heaven world, when their merits have exhausted, they come back to the world of mortals and thus abiding in the injunctions again. They go back and forth, going and returning. Samsara, but samsara not in the sense of, um, what we have talked about, that going and returning without any knowledge. They have this knowledge, but again, they keep on returning. Why? Because they're not reaching the ultimate knowledge. And that is the whole point. They are not actually reaching the royal knowledge, the Rajvidya, but they are attaining a certain level of knowledge, which is not letting them go beyond that. So they go to the higher worlds and come back. So these Vedic ritualists, they having enjoyed the vast world with their merits are exhausted, enter the world of mortals, thus abiding by the injunctions of the three Vedas, desiring objects of desires, they attain to the state of going and return. Okay? Now, what Gurudev says is that, they only have a debit card. Once the debit card runs out, then that's the end of it. They have no way of kind of topping up the debit card. It runs out and here they come back again. So in the final section, then Bhagwan is going to talk about devotion. So can you see that in this last three, he talks about Jnana Vignan, he talks about the path of the Vedic ritualist and this specific way of path of karma, and then he's talking about devotion. So he's taking up all these different pathways. And here he talks about the path of devotion. And here's Bhagwan's promise. To those men who worship me alone, thinking of no other, Ananya Bhakti, to those ever controlled, self-controlled, I secure for them that which is not already possessed, yoga, by them, and preserve for them what they already possess. Okay. This is one of the famous verses of the Bhagavad Gita. And what it is that don't worry about anything else. I'm going to take care of what you don't have. I will give it to you. And what you have, I will preserve for you. So, don't spend your time looking after and possessing and taking things and going about, acquiring things, hoarding things, acquiring things, and then protecting them and spending time on protecting them as well. He says, I'll take care of that. What you do, you just worship me alone. Don't go to anything else. Don't think of anything else. Remain ever self-control. I will make sure that you have everything. And then he goes on to say, even those devotees who endowed with faith worship other gods, worship me alone, son of Kunti, but by the wrong method. Now, So he has told us that here's one way of doing it, is that this kind of single-pointedness towards divinity, and divinity in this form of the ultimate, or this name and form as avatar. Now, of course, we know that there are many other gods as well. And these gods are called the devatas. And these are, what some of the devotees may worship. Um, but what Bhagwan is saying, there is a relationship between those gods and myself, because through them, they are actually worshipping me. But what the wrong method he is saying here, is that they're looking at the, in a sense, at a secondary level of my divinity. They're not going directly to coming to me, whereas the Mahatmas and what he was describing just now, they goes directly to that. And that really is the royal secret, is go directly. Don't go via things. You go directly to the Lord Himself. Because he says, I alone am the enjoyer in and all, the Lord of all sacrifices. They do not know me in my essence, and hence they fall. In other words, this is also another way of saying, yes, divinity is in the minds and the hearts of these people, but they are kind of worshipping gods for their own sake, for getting various things in the world. They want to enjoy certain things either in the world or beyond the world, in the heaven. And because they don't know me in essence, which means they have not gained this realization that all this is one ultimate reality, divinity, then they have to come back again to this mortal world. So this he talks about, in this context, he talks about the worship of the devas and the ancestors, the pitru. He says the worshippers of the devas go to the devas, the pitrus go to the ancestors, and the bhutas or the elements, those who worship the bhutas or the elements, go worshippers of the bhutas. In other words, that whatever you worship, you will go there eventually. And that applies in our transactional life as well, that whatever we worship, we turn our attention, our energy, and our effort towards that thing, and that becomes like a goal of our life. And we keep on putting that. We worship, for example, money. Some people worship money, and therefore that becomes their devata. And that becomes the way in which they relate to life. And everything is seen within the context or within the lens of that wealth which people want to acquire. And what Bhagwan is saying, whatever you worship, there you go. But my worshippers come unto me. So, in other words, that he's saying, yes, if you turn your attention totally towards me, then it is likely that you're going to come to me. And what he says, worship with devotion. Now, this is again another famous verse of the Bhagavad Gita. He says, whoever offers me with devotion directly, not via, to the devas or the pitrus, offer me with devotion a leaf, a flower, a fruit, water that I accept offered by the pure minded with devotion. Now, one is saying that is my direct connection to you through devotion and through this pure mind. If you have a pure mind with devotion and you offer something to me, I will accept it, whether it is something like a leaf or a flower or a fruit or whatever it is. In other words, that this creates a direct connection between me as a devotee and the Lord as the object of my devotion. And what Bhagwan has been saying all along in this verse is that people who go into a different route, they will still keep on going round and round the cycle of birth and death. But if with this kind of way in which you offer these things to me, whatever you do, he says, now this is the instruction, whatever you do, whatever you eat, whatever you offer in sacrifice, whatever you give me in charity, whatever you practice as austerity, if you do that as an offering to me, then you will come to me. Because why? There is this direct connection which is established between the ultimate reality and the transactional reality. Mine is at the moment the transactional reality because I'm not yet realized. And in my transactional reality, I'm eating, I'm doing the sacrifices, I'm doing this charity, I'm doing this austerity, but with this idea that I'm doing this for the Lord, dedicating all our actions to the Lord without expecting anything in return is not only karma yoga, but bhakti yoga as well. So this is again the secret, how to go about in the world with this kind of sense of sacrifice, offering everything to God, knowing that all this is divine, and with pure mind, with that devotion, and with that action, one is offering everything to the Lord. This becomes the direct connection between the seeker and the Lord. So, if that is done, then Bhagwan says, you will be freed from the bonds of action, which are yielding good and evil fruits. In other words, that actions will bind you if you are in the ego identity. This we have seen before. But if you are offering everything to me and there is no sense of mindness and me, and there is no sense of enjoyship and doership like we have been talking about, there is this renunciation of action in knowledge. Also, the sense of doership is given up and the enjoyership. He says, we become free from the bonds of action with this kind of practice. And he says, with that, the mind becomes steadfast in the yoga of renunciation, and liberation is attained, and you shall come to me. So here kind of instructions in the last, this particular section as to how one can attain the ultimate state of liberation and what are the practices which one should focus on. And what Bhagwan further goes on to say, the same am I to all beings. To me, there is none hateful nor dear, but those who worship me with devotion are in me and I'm also in them. Remember, I talked about this earlier on, this pair of opposites, this apparent contradiction. Now, here, what Bhagwan is saying is that those who worship me with devotion in the transactional way, then they are in me and I'm also in them. In other words, there is a kind of very close connection between me and this divinity. And even if I'm doing this in the transactional, still in the state of identification, still it is available to me in this kind of way. And he says, even if the most sinful worship me with single pointed devotion to none else, he too shall indeed be regarded as righteous, for he has rightly resolved. So, in other words, if the resolution is there, even a minute resolution, it becomes the pathway to achieving the ultimate. Soon he becomes righteous, attains the eternal peace. O Kaunteya, know for certain that my devotee is never destroyed. Again, Bhagwan says, this, whatever we do in terms of our spiritual life, nothing is going to be destroyed. For taking refuge in me, maybe of sinful birth, women, Vaishyas, or Sudras as well, even they attain the supreme goal. Now, here, this, may sound very controversial because Bhagwan is saying, all these are of sinful birth. But what Gurudev explains in this particular verse, please read it. If you have the Bhagavad Gita commentary by Gurudev, he says these are not specifically related to women and Vaishyas and Sudras. What he's saying is that there are different complexions of the mind. And those different complexions may be related to a closer identification with the me and the mind. Even if we are in that particular way, it doesn't matter. We can still attain the supreme goal. Now, this is what he was talking about. The two extreme categories of people, and we got a whole spectrum, like we saw in the earlier chapter, that he described 7 different types of people who are, atheistic and 4 who are theistic. What Bhagwan is saying that this liberation is available to everybody. All they have to do is to step on the path. And in a sense that all these different complexions of the mind can easily enter and can be entered by those people with a pure mind and devoted royal saints, having reached, obtained this impermanent and joyless world do they worship me devotedly. So these are the people with a purified mind. They are looking at the world and saying, this is impermanent. This is joyless. I am not interested in that. What I want is the divinity. I want the ultimate. And therefore they become devout seekers. So finally, Bhagwan says, here's a prescription again coming up. Fix your mind on me, be devoted to me, sacrifice to me, bow down to me, having thus united your whole self with me, taking me as a supreme goal, you shall come to me. So here Bhagwan then reveals us to the secret of practice as to what we need to do in order to reach the supreme goal, not intermediate goal, not heaven, not Brahmaloka even, but to go even beyond all these things to go to the supreme goal, which is realization of Brahman. So this is what he says are things to be done. Okay? And if we then kind of study this, reflect on this, then we begin to understand what it is that I have to do in my own life. Okay. So now let's look at this same thing again. We will see that, these are various different ways in which we are going to reach the ultimate liberation. And what Bhagwan is showing us is that, yes, unmanifest, dhyana, jnana, and then manifest, upasana, karma yoga, we can, having this right knowledge, the royal knowledge and the royal secret, you can combine all these things. It doesn't have to be done in this kind of way. What he says, if we take all these things as means of reaching the highest, then we will attain that liberation. And in this case, something slightly different as well is that the ajnani can also step into the pathway by just thinking of righteousness as he begins to open up his mind towards a kind of righteous way of living, that now pathway opens up even for the ajnani, so that he, through this pathway, can attain liberation and get away from this repeated births and deaths. So slightly different way of putting it in this kind of way, Bhagwan is talking in this chapter. Okay, so living through the Gita now, doing the homework, what will you do now? Conscious spiritual living, which I keep on repeating again and again because this is so much part of our day-to-day bread and butter spirituality. Yeah? And these are methods by which we can quickly and intensely feel the presence of divine in our own lives. Okay? So remember to keep on um, reminding yourself again and again of this ABCD, and to bring them into moment to moment of your life. So what will you do? Again, reflect, listen, read, reflect. Chapter number 9. As I said, if you have the commentary by Gurudev, that's the best one. He will explains in a lot of detail. This is just to give you an overall picture of chapter number 9. Reflect on your own sadhana and consider how you might integrate all these paths in your own lives and practice according to the guidance given in verse number 34, which I was saying is a kind of summary of all the prescriptions and saying, okay, here's what you do on a daily basis, daily practice of living through the Gita, and continue to practice all of the techniques from the previous chapters and prepare and execute a daily intensified plan of meditation. Meditation is, important part of our daily sadhana. So enjoy the sadhana, stay safe, and stay well. So that brings us to the end of this chapter number 9. Okay. So